Hi, let us prepare for our story. Settle into your bed and let the weight of the day begin to lift from your shoulders. Good night. Lie down like this, with your arms resting gently at your sides. Now, perhaps shift just a little, like that, until you find the perfect position of ease and comfort. Let every muscle soften and release. Feel at ease. You are safe here, and a wonderful story is waiting for you. Have a nice dream as we drift into our tale together. Our story begins not in a sunlit meadow, but in the deep, quiet hush of a grand house where a little girl feels very small. Her name is Jane. She is a child of 10, with a mind as quick and watchful as a little bird, living in a home that does not feel like her own. It is called Gateshead Hall, a place of polished wood and heavy velvet curtains that seem to absorb all the laughter in the world. I always picture her there, curled up in a window seat, finding a friend in the pages of a book, trying to make herself invisible. But she is not invisible. She is a constant, quiet reminder of a promise made, a promise that has grown heavy as an anchor for the lady of the house, her aunt. And so a chill follows Jane from room to room, a chill that has nothing to do with the damp English air. There is a moment, a memory from her childhood that feels especially cold and lonely. After a scuffle with her cousin, a boy of great size and little kindness, it is Jane who is blamed. Her punishment is to be locked away in the Red Room. I imagine the heavy click of the lock, a sound that echoes the closing of a heart. The room is vast and silent and deeply red, the color of wine, the color of a fading sunset. It is a room full of shadows and ghosts of memory, where her kind uncle had passed from the world. As she sits there, a tiny figure on a grand stool, the evening light drains from the windows, and the shadows grow long and deep. A profound loneliness, a feeling of utter abandonment settles upon her. It is in this vast, silent room that her spirit, so often quiet, finally cries out, not in anger, but in a desperate plea against the injustice of it all. It is a cry that leaves her exhausted, her small body collapsing into a feverish sleep. And it is from this moment, this cold and lonely room, that her path begins to turn. She is sent away to a place meant to shape young girls through discipline and denial, Lowood School. Imagine, if you will, a long stone building nestled in a low valley, often draped in mist. The world of Lowood is one of gray dresses, plain food, and the constant soft sound of rain on the slate roof. The days are marked by the ringing of bells, each one calling the girls from their chilly dormitory to their lessons, to their meager meals, to their prayers. And yet it is here, in this place of hardship, that a small warm light finds its way to Jane. She finds a friend, a girl named Helen, whose soul is as gentle as her own is fiery. Helen teaches her not through words of rebellion, but through a quiet, unshakable grace. I find it so remarkable to think of them together, two small figures huddled for warmth, sharing stories in whispered tones after the candles are put out. Helen's friendship is a soft blanket for Jane's heart, a lesson in endurance and hope that she will carry with her for the rest of her life. Years pass like the turning of pages in a well-read book. The seasons come and go across the moors surrounding the school. The little girl grows into a young woman of 18. She has become a teacher at Lowood now, her life still measured by the ringing of bells. But a quiet yearning has begun to stir within her, a longing for a new view, a different window to look out of, a whisper of a wider world beyond the valley. And so, with a hopeful heart, she places an advertisement in a newspaper, offering her services as a governess. The reply comes from a place with a name that sounds like a line from a poem: Thornfield Hall. Let us travel with her now on that long journey. Picture the gentle, rhythmic rocking of the coach, the muffled sound of horses' hooves on the road, a steady, soothing beat. The world outside the window is a soft blur of rolling green hills and sleepy villages under a gray sky. For the first time, Jane is moving toward a future she has chosen herself. A quiet sense of anticipation settles over her, as soft and hopeful as the morning mist. The coach leaves her at a crossroads in the fading light of a winter afternoon. A smaller carriage is there to meet her, and it carries her the final few miles. The road grows darker, lined with the skeletal shapes of ancient trees, and then she sees it, Thornfield Hall. It is not a place of light and laughter, but a grand and silent silhouette against the deepening twilight. It is a house of imposing stone, with rows of dark windows that seem like sleeping eyes. There is a sense of immense history here, of secrets held within its thick stone walls. The great oak door swings open, and a warm golden light spills out. A kind grandmotherly woman with a gentle face greets her. This is Mrs. Fairfax, the housekeeper. She leads her inside, her voice as soft and comforting as a well-loved quilt. They walk through halls where armor gleams softly in the firelight, and portraits watch with silent, painted eyes. Finally, she is shown to her room, and here, after so long, is a place of welcome. A fire crackles merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The bed is large, with a thick, soft mattress and crisp, clean sheets. Everything is quiet, peaceful. The long, weary journey is over. She is safe, she is warm, and as she stands in the gentle firelight, a feeling of calm settles deep within her bones. A new chapter of her life is about to begin here, in this house of echoes and shadows. And for now, all is still, all is quiet. It is a good place to rest. The first weeks at Thornfield pass like a gentle dream. Jane's life falls into a quiet, peaceful rhythm, a stark contrast to the harsh bells of Lowood. Her pupil is a little French girl named Adele, a whirlwind of silks and songs, whose cheerful energy fills the schoolroom with light. I find myself smiling when I picture Jane with her, patiently guiding her through lessons, her calm presence a steady anchor for Adele's bubbly spirit. For the first time, Jane has a purpose that feels truly her own. She feels useful, respected, and, in the quiet solitude of the great house, surprisingly content. The house itself is a character in our story. It is vast, a labyrinth of quiet corridors, grand dust-sheeted rooms, and winding staircases. Jane loves to explore it in the evenings, after Adele is asleep. She wanders through the library, running her fingers over the leather spines of books that have slept there for decades, breathing in the scent of old paper and beeswax. She stands in the long gallery, studying the portraits of Rochester's ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to hold the secrets of generations. But sometimes, in the dead of night, a strange sound would drift down from the floor above. It was a laugh, a chilling, mirthless sound that was not like any laugh Jane had ever heard. Mrs. Fairfax, the kind housekeeper, would dismiss it calmly, attributing it to a servant named Grace Poole, a woman with a fondness for spirits. But the explanation never quite settled in Jane's heart. The sound was too unsettling, too full of a strange and wild despair. I always imagined Jane lying still in her bed, listening to that sound echo in the hallway, a single dissonant note in the otherwise peaceful symphony of the house. The master of the house, Mr. Rochester, was away. His presence was felt only in the richness of the furniture, the quality of the paintings, and the quiet efficiency with which the house was run. Then, one cold afternoon, as twilight was beginning to bleed its purple ink across the snowy lane, Jane's quiet world was interrupted. She was out walking, enjoying the crisp air, when she heard the sound of an approaching horse. A moment later, a great black steed with a rider came into view. The lane was slick with a sheet of ice, and in a sudden clumsy motion the horse slipped, sending its rider tumbling to the ground. Jane, without a thought for her own safety, rushed to help the fallen stranger. He was a man with a dark brow, a stern face, and eyes that seemed to burn with a restless energy. He was gruff and dismissive, yet he leaned on her small frame to get back to his horse. There was a strange intensity in the encounter, a silent meeting of two solitary souls on a lonely winter road. It was only when she returned to the house that she learned the identity of the stranger. It was her master, Mr. Rochester, finally come home. Life at Thornfield changed with his arrival. The quiet rhythm was broken by a new, unpredictable energy. Mr. Rochester would summon Jane and Adele to the drawing room after dinner. I picture them there, in the grand room lit by a roaring fire. Adele would dance and sing, but Mr. Rochester's gaze would be fixed on Jane. His moods were like the English weather, shifting from sunny and talkative to stormy and silent in an instant. He would question her, challenge her, draw out her opinions on art, on life, on morality. Their conversations were a strange dance, a meeting of two minds that were, in their own ways, equally sharp and equally lonely. And Jane, who had spent her life feeling invisible, found herself, for the first time, truly seen. One night, the strange and unsettling mystery of the house reached out for her. Jane was in her bed, drifting on the edge of sleep, when that terrible, familiar laugh echoed through the hall, this time seeming to come from just outside her own door. She sat up, her heart a quiet drum in the silence. Then another sound, a soft shuffling noise, and then the faint, unmistakable smell of something burning. Moving like a shadow, she crept out of her room. A pale ribbon of smoke was coiling from under Mr. Rochester's door. She turned the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the room was thick with smoke, and the curtains of the master bed were licked with orange flames. Mr. Rochester himself was asleep, lost to the world, a faint smile on his lips as the fire crept closer. With a speed she didn't know she possessed, she grabbed the heavy water pitcher from his washstand and doused the flames, soaking the bed and its occupant. Mr. Rochester awoke with a jolt, sputtering, disoriented, as the fire hissed into darkness. He looked at her, his dark eyes wide in the moonlight, slowly understanding what had happened. She had saved his life. He led her from the room, his hand gripping her arm, a silent, urgent command. He went to the third-floor corridor, and she heard a brief, muffled exchange behind a closed door. When he returned, his face was grim. He made her sit with him, his gratitude a palpable force in the cold, dark room. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, and he made her promise to speak of this to no one. As she finally returned to her own room, the chill of the night air clinging to her, she was no longer just the quiet governess. She was a keeper of secrets, bound to the mysterious master of Thornfield by the shared, silent knowledge of a danger that still lurked, unseen, in the echoing hallways of the house. And here, in this moment of deep mystery, we will let her rest, and let you rest too. A silent, invisible thread began to weave itself between Jane and Mr. Rochester. It was a bond forged in smoke and secrecy, a shared knowledge that set them apart from everyone else in the great sleepy house. I often think of them in this time, meeting in the hallway or the library, their eyes holding a conversation that no one else could hear. There was a new tenderness in his gruff manner, a quiet reliance in his gaze that made Jane's heart feel as though it were a small bird held gently in a safe hand. But just as this fragile warmth began to blossom, a cold wind blew in from the outside world. Mr. Rochester announced he was expecting guests, and soon Thornfield Hall was shaken from its quiet slumber. Carriages rolled up the long drive, depositing a flock of elegant lords and ladies onto the grand stone steps. The silent hallways now rustled with the sound of silk gowns and echoed with bright, brittle laughter. The air grew heavy with expensive perfume. For Jane, this glittering invasion felt like the arrival of a different species. She would watch them from a quiet corner of the drawing-room, feeling as plain and gray as a field sparrow in a cage of tropical birds. My heart aches a little for her in those moments, seeing her quiet strength mistaken for shyness, her deep thoughts hidden behind a watchful silence. Among the guests, one star shone brighter and colder than all the others, the Lady Blanche Ingram. She was magnificent, a vision with raven-black hair, eyes like polished jewels, and a proud, regal bearing. She was accomplished, witty, and everyone, including, it seemed, Mr. Rochester himself, was captivated by her. Jane would watch as he leaned in to hear her stories, his laughter mingling with hers. And with each shared glance between them, Jane felt her own small, secret hopes begin to fade. I imagine her alone in her room that night, performing a small, painful ritual. She takes out a piece of paper and draws two portraits. On one side, she sketches the beautiful Lady Blanche Ingram, all elegant lines and flawless features. On the other, with unflinching honesty, she draws herself. Portrait of a governess, disconnected, poor, and plain. She forces herself to look at the two images, a quiet, heartbreaking exercise to remind her of her place, to quell the foolish fluttering in her own heart. The days turned into a slow, elegant party, a pantomime of courtship between the master of the house and his noble guest. Then one evening a new entertainment was announced. An old gypsy woman had come to the house and offered to tell the fortunes of the young ladies. One by one they went into the library to have their palms read, emerging with blushes and whispers. When the gypsy demanded to see the governess, Jane went, her heart beating a steady, quiet rhythm. The library was dim, lit only by the dancing flames of the fire. The gypsy sat cloaked in shadow, her voice a low rasp. But as she began to speak to Jane, her questions became strangely personal, probing not the future, but the secrets of Jane's own heart. And as she looked closer, she saw through the clever disguise. The dark eyes burning in the firelight were not those of an old woman. They were his. They were Mr. Rochester's. It was a strange theatrical game, a desperate attempt to hear what she would never say aloud. The charade was interrupted. A message arrived announcing the unexpected appearance of a new guest, a Mr. Richard Mason from the Spanish town in Jamaica. The moment Mr. Rochester heard the name, a shadow passed over his face, a look of profound dread that chilled Jane to the bone. The master's playful mood vanished, replaced by a grim, tense anxiety. Later that night, the house was plunged into terror. A scream, long and horrifying, tore through the silence of the upper floors. It was a sound of both rage and agony, a sound not quite human. It brought the entire party from their beds, their faces pale with fear. Mr. Rochester, his own face like a mask of stone, calmly assured them it was merely a servant having a nightmare. But once the guests were quieted, he came to Jane's door. His composure was gone, his face etched with a desperate urgency she had seen only once before, on the night of the fire. "Jane," he whispered, his voice strained, "I need you. Say nothing. Just come with me." He led her not to the servants' quarters, but up the main stairs, and then up another, narrower staircase she had never climbed before. He led her toward the source of that terrible scream, toward the secret heart of the house. And Jane followed, her loyalty to this troubled, tormented man overriding every instinct of fear. She was stepping into the darkness with him, ready to face whatever secret it held. We will leave her there, on the threshold of discovery, and let the quiet of the night settle around you now as you drift into sleep. Jane followed Mr. Rochester up the narrow staircase, her heart a quiet drum against her ribs. He paused before a low, dark door, and from behind it came a low, pained groan. The narrator in me, the one who has told this story to myself so many times, always wants to reach out and comfort her in this moment for what she is about to see. Mr. Rochester unlocked the door, and they stepped into a hidden room. By the light of a single dim candle, Jane saw the guest, Mr. Mason, slumped in a chair. His face was pale as chalk, and his white shirt was stained with a dark, wet bloom of crimson. The air was thick with the scent of fear and spilled spirits. While Mr. Rochester left to fetch a surgeon, he left Jane to tend to the wounded man, trusting her with his terrible secret. I am always struck by her strength here. She sat in that silent, terrifying room, wiping the man's brow, offering him water, a small, steady beacon of calm in a sea of unspoken horror. She did not flinch, she simply did what was needed. When the dawn came and the surgeon had taken Mr. Mason away, Mr. Rochester found Jane in the garden, trying to wash the night's events away in the cool morning air. It was in that garden weeks later, on a beautiful, warm summer evening, that everything changed again. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and nightstock. A nightingale sang its heart out in the branches of the great horse-chestnut tree. He stood with her in the moonlight, and he began to speak. He told her that he was to marry as everyone expected, but that the thought of it brought him no joy. His words were a torrent of emotion, a confession of a heart that felt trapped. And then he turned to her, his voice softening to a raw, vulnerable whisper. He told her that she, Jane, was his only hope for happiness, that she was his second self, his better angel. And there, under the silent watch of the moon, he asked her to be his wife. Joy, pure and overwhelming, flooded Jane's heart. It felt like a dream, a beautiful, impossible dream come true. All the pain, all the loneliness of her life seemed to vanish in that one perfect moment. The morning of their wedding arrived, quiet and hopeful. Jane dressed not in fine silks, but in a simple pearl-gray dress and a veil given to her by her beloved. She looked at herself in the mirror, a woman on the very edge of a happiness so profound it frightened her. As they walked to the little church on the grounds, a quiet two-person procession, the world felt still and perfect. They stood before the altar, the priest's words echoing in the sacred silence. And then, just as he was about to pronounce them husband and wife, a single clear voice cut through the air. "The marriage cannot go on." Two men stepped from the shadows. One was a lawyer, and the other was Mr. Mason, his face still pale from his ordeal. The lawyer stated in a calm, firm voice that Mr. Rochester could not marry because he was, in fact, already married. His wife was a woman from Jamaica, a woman named Bertha Antoinetta Mason. A profound, cold silence filled the church. The dream shattered. Mr. Rochester, his face a mask of defiant agony, did not deny it. Instead, he invited them all back to the house to meet his wife. He led the small, somber group up the stairs, past Jane's room, up the narrow staircase to the hidden third floor. He unlocked the same door Jane had sat behind weeks before. The room within was like a cage, and pacing within it was a wild, tragic figure. This was not a monster, but a human soul lost to a terrible madness. This was Bertha, his wife, the source of the laughter, the smoke, the scream, the secret heart of Thornfield. My heart breaks for all of them in that room, for Rochester, bound for 15 years to this living tragedy, for the poor caged and broken soul that was Bertha, and most of all for Jane, who saw her entire world of happiness crumble to dust in a single horrific moment. That night Jane sat alone in her room. The beautiful wedding dress lay on the bed, a cruel reminder of the joy she had so briefly held. Mr. Rochester came to her, his heart broken, and begged her to stay with him, to live with him as his love, if not his wife. Every part of her wanted to say yes, to comfort him, to stay in the only home where she had ever known true love. But the quiet, resilient spirit that had survived Gateshead and Lowood, the spirit that valued her own soul above all else, knew she could not. It was the hardest decision of her life. As the house fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, Jane packed a few small things. With a final silent goodbye, she opened her door and slipped like a ghost through the sleeping halls of Thornfield. She unbolted the great front door and stepped out into the cold pre-dawn mist, leaving behind her heart, her hopes, and the only love she had ever known. And here, in her moment of quiet, heartbreaking departure, we will leave her to her journey and leave you to yours. Our story finds Jane wandering, a solitary figure in the vast, open landscape of the English moors. She had fled Thornfield with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart heavy with a sorrow too deep for tears. The world that had been so full of promise just days before had become an empty wilderness. For days she walked, sleeping under the vast, silent canopy of the stars, eating wild berries she found on the heath. I do not want you to think of this time as one of pure suffering. Instead, I ask you to imagine it as a time of quiet unburdening. With every step, she shed a layer of her old life. The loneliness of Gateshead, the discipline of Lowood, the heartbreak of Thornfield. She was stripped down to the very core of her being, and in that raw emptiness she found a strange, quiet strength. She was no longer a governess, or a bride, or an orphan. She was simply Jane, alone under the sky, and she had survived. Exhausted and starving, she was drawn one night to a small light glimmering in the distance. It was a house, Moore House, and through the window she saw a scene of simple, warm domesticity. After being turned away from the door by a stern servant, she collapsed on the threshold, ready to give up. But the master of the house, a young clergyman named St. John Rivers, found her and brought her inside. She was taken in by St. John and his two gentle, scholarly sisters, Diana and Mary. They nursed her back to health with a quiet, unquestioning kindness that felt like a miracle. They did not pry or ask for her story. They simply gave her warmth, food, and a safe place to heal. In their company, Jane began to feel a sense of peace she had never known. She took a position as the teacher in the small village school, finding purpose in the simple, honest work. And then another miracle. Through a series of near unbelievable revelations, it was discovered that her long-lost uncle had passed away, leaving her a vast fortune. But more important than the money, much more, was the discovery that came with it. The Rivers family, kind Diana, gentle Mary, and serious St. John were her own cousins, her family. The narrator in me, the one who so loves this story, feels a surge of quiet joy at this moment. Imagine it. Jane, the lonely orphan, had finally found her tribe, her kin, her home. In an act of pure love, she insisted on splitting her inheritance 4 ways, binding them together not just by blood, but by shared fortune. St. John, however, had a different vision for Jane's future. He was a man of intense, cold ambition, planning to spend his life as a missionary in India. He saw in Jane not a cousin to be loved, but a partner to be used, a perfect, steadfast, and obedient missionary's wife. He proposed to her, not with words of love or passion, but with an appeal to duty and divine purpose. His proposal felt to Jane like a cold stone in her heart. To marry him would be to entomb her spirit, to deny the true passionate love her heart still yearned for. Yet his will was powerful, and she was so very tired. One evening, as he pressed her for an answer, she almost gave in. She almost agreed to sacrifice her heart for a life of pious duty. She closed her eyes, and in the deep silence of her soul, she whispered a prayer for guidance, and the guidance came. Softly, yet as clear as a bell, a voice seemed to ride upon the wind, traveling over hundreds of miles of moorland to find her. It was a voice she knew better than her own. It was a cry of pure, desperate longing. "Jane! Jane! Jane!" it called. It was his voice, Mr. Rochester's. A jolt of absolute certainty shot through her. Her path was clear. Her heart knew where it belonged. The next morning she left her newfound family, promising to return, and began the long journey back to him. She arrived at Thornfield to find not a grand hall, but a blackened, empty ruin. The house stood stark and skeletal against the sky. From a local innkeeper, she learned the terrible story. Months after she had fled, the mad Bertha had escaped her room one night, setting the entire house ablaze. As the inferno raged, Mr. Rochester had saved the servants, but as he tried to save his wife, Bertha had thrown herself from the battlements. In the collapse, He had been terribly injured, losing his sight and one of his hands. He was now living as a recluse in a remote manor house called Ferndean. She went to him at once. She found him sitting by a fire, a broken and humbled man, his proud dark eyes now sightless. She crept into the room and quietly took the tray of water he was fumbling for. "Give me the water, Mary," he said, thinking she was a servant. "Mary is in the kitchen," she replied, her voice trembling just a little. He froze. A look of disbelief, of profound, heart-stopping shock crossed his face. He reached out with a shaking hand, touching her hair, her face, her arm, as if she were a ghost he had conjured from his grief. "Jane Eyre, is it you?" he whispered. "It is I said, my voice full of all the love I had carried for so long. "I have come back to you." And in that moment all the pain and sorrow was washed away. They were no longer master and governess, no longer separated by secrets or society. They were simply two halves of a single soul, reunited at last. They were married, and Jane became his eyes, his hands, his constant companion. And in time, a miracle of its own, the sight in one of his eyes began to return, just enough for him to see his own son, their son, when he was placed in his arms. They found a quiet, profound happiness together, a peace that was deeper and truer for all the sorrow they had endured to find it. And here, in their peaceful home, with the sound of a crackling fire and a sleeping child, we will leave them. Our story is over. May your own heart be at peace, and may your dreams be sweet and deep. Good night.